Shimelle.com and welcome to my workshop here at True Scrap 3. Today I'm here with a workshop about collection packs called The Perfect Collection, and I'm here to help you use your favorite collection pack right down to the very last scrap. We're going to make a giant stack of layouts, or as many as you like, with one collection pack. Now, truthfully, you can use any collection of papers that you want, and you really wouldn't have to stick straight to one collection if you preferred to mix and match your papers. But the idea of using a collection pack that's assembled by the brand and you can just pick it and go means that that decision-making process is completely eliminated, so that you can just pick something where you like the look of the collection and use that and not have to worry about trying to find a million different papers that will go perfectly well to create a lot of layouts. So if you'd like to adapt this to any other mix of papers, you can, but I'd really encourage you to give it a go with your favorite collection pack, especially if you're somebody who keeps the collection packs all sealed up as if they were precious and perfect and forgets to kind of actually use them. So I'm going to make a whole bunch of layouts, and I'm going to be using a brand new collection pack from American Crafts. They haven't actually done many collection packs in the past, but they've released one with the new Amy Tangerine sketchbook collection. And what's lovely about this is that you get 18 double-sided papers, but they're all different. So you've got 36 patterns to work with, which means there's lots and lots of room for variety across a great number of pages. Now, other collection packs, some companies do that where they give you as many different papers as they can, and each one is unique and has one pattern on either side. But other collection packs will give you 2 of each pattern. There's not one way that's better for everybody, because you might prefer to have fewer patterns and more repetition, or you might want to use more double page layouts in your album, which tends to be more useful with 2 of each pattern rather than 1. So there are all different ways to make a decision, but you can use any collection pack you'd like, or any collection pack that you've cobbled together of your own stash, and you can work along with me. To this, we're just going to be adding a few basics, but you will need some cardstock to get the most from all the pattern paper. You can choose colors that will match the colors in the collection that you've chosen, or you can go with some neutrals. I'm going to be using just 3 colors of cardstock in as neutral as they come: black, white, and gray. But American Crafts do create cardstock in all the colors that match the collection. So if I wanted something that was more vibrant, something that was just really bold and in your face, I could go with those bright colors. So it's just a case of what you want the overall feel of the layouts to be and what your personal style is. To that, we're just going to add some of our favorite unique things to us. So I'll be using my favorite punches, my favorite stamps, and things like that, where you'll go ahead and add in your favorites, and the end result will mean that we follow the same path, but we end up with layouts that are true to our own style. So anyone can use these steps. To get started, take your papers and divide them into 3 categories. You're going to have a stack of your solid cardstock in whatever colors you've decided to use. So I have white, black, and gray. And then go through the collection pack and look specifically for any papers that have designs that you might want to cut out and use separately. So amongst these papers, I found these frames that I thought I could easily cut out and see myself using as embellishments. This camera print was included in 2 different colorways, the black and white and the brightly colored. And this one, I thought I might cut out some of these circles and use them separately. So I've taken those 4 pattern papers and set them aside in their own kind of special category at the moment, which leaves me with this big stack of everything else, which is all sorts of overall patterns and the things that I didn't think I would cut out separately. I would use more as boxes or shapes, borders, backgrounds, all of that sort of stuff. But things that I wouldn't be doing lots of detailed scissor work with, things I would be cutting on my trimmer. Now, if you've taken either of the earlier True Scrap workshops, I have 2 of them, I'm going to take a little bit from each of them in this project. In the first one, I talked a lot about this idea of take your paper and cut it all up without looking. Well, I'm not going to be quite that dramatic. If you go to this address, you can download a little cheat sheet. It has a cutting diagram that you can use for all your papers, and then it has a set of kind of loose sketches or starting points points that will help you convert all those cut pieces into a big stack of layouts. And you can adapt it as much as you like, but it will give you a little bit more confidence in cutting everything up and knowing how far you can stretch all those different sheets of pattern paper. So do check that out. I think this workshop will make a lot more sense if you have that PDF on the table as you're working. So that's a little bit from the first option, and what I'm going to do then is I'm going to take all of these papers that are left in that big stack. I've put those others aside that I might cut separately, but all of the ones that I'm quite happy to cut any which way, I'm going to go ahead and cut them according to that diagram just from the beginning. And the diagram works in a way that it doesn't need a specific number of pieces of paper. Once you get to it, you kind of follow it for a few sheets, and then you'll get an idea of what kind of pieces will work best for this project. So I'm going to follow that, and I'm going to get all of this chopped up. After following the cutting diagram and cutting all 18 sheets of pattern paper aside from the, how many were there here? 4 that I separated out because I might want to hand cut them later. Those are just going to stay on the side. So I've cut 14 double-sided sheets, which has given me this massive stack of all different sizes. But also I've kept all the branding strips because in this particular collection, the reverse of the UPC side with the barcode has a coordinating design. So I'm not going to use those straight away, but I am going to keep them and put them to the side and come back to them when I'm embellishing my layouts. And that way I know that there's no waste. So I've cut everything here, and there's not so much as a tiny little strip of paper that is going to waste. Now, at this point in time, I need to make some decisions about where I'm going with this. When I mentioned that there's an idea here that carries on from my second workshop, the one on going with the flow or album continuity. You can make a decision to use this all in one album and make a complete project from start to finish where everything's going to coordinate with this collection. Or you can make these all completely different layouts that will go in different albums depending on how you keep your albums organized or how you work. It can work either way. So you could create a big stack of layouts that become one final project and tell one story from start to finish. Or you could have lots and lots of different pages that are going to go in all sorts of different albums because they have all different photos and all different topics, and they're from all different points in time or all different themes. That's absolutely fine. Either option will work. The idea is just that you're going to take one collection and you're going to make lots of layouts and not have any waste left over. So I have all of these scraps of paper, and I know in my mind what project I'm working on. And for me, this is all going to go in one album and tell one story, but it doesn't have to be that way. And so now I can start to just put my page bases together, knowing that I have all those photos ready to go, and I don't need to look at each photo and make the layout as make one layout and then stop and move on to the second layout with the photos. I know it sounds a little bit backward to how we normally work, but I promise if you give it a try, there's actually still a lot of freedom in making each page perfect as you go. So I'm going to take all of these papers, I'm going to follow that PDF guide by making them into the various starting point layouts, and then I'll start to put my photos and everything else that makes a page finish together. At this point in the process, I have 16 12 by 12 layouts. Some of them are double pages, but there are 16 separate 12 by 12 sheets, if you were. So I have 16 of those. I have this little stack left of the different bits and pieces that I didn't use that will come into play those last few scraps. I have all those narrow 12-inch strips that I cut off with the barcodes on them. And then I have these few extras. I have those designs that I thought I might cut out, and I ended up keeping 6 by 12 of the 2 cameras because I figured I'm not going to cut out every single camera on 2 whole sheets. So I just saved half a sheet of each. And enough of these circles that I could have all the colors represented, but I liked this green, so I put the rest of that in with the section to use on the pages. And I kept this whole sheet with the frames. I do like this one, and I think once I've cut out the frames, I'll have a few of those border strips left to add in. But there were so many frames, and they didn't repeat, so I thought I would go ahead and keep that rather than guess on which ones I would want to use later on. So I have all of those bits left to cut by hand. And I still have one of the larger sheets, which if you notice on the sheet, there's a couple designs where I've kept larger sizes and then noted that those are particularly good if you want to die cut. So I've kept this sheet that will go through the silhouette if in case I wanted to die cut some large titles or some larger shapes. So I just have one big pattern that's not overly fussy, so it would work well with die cutting. And I have that left intact, and the reverse is one that would work as well. So I'll take you through the basic starting points that I've created here with the 16 layouts. These are pretty much, I think, in the order that I will use them in the album. I might change my mind, but this was the order that I created them, but thinking as I would go that this would be the first page and the last page is definitely the closing page. So it kind of alternates between a single page and then, and then a double layout. So two 12 by 12. So when I said 16, I'm counting that as 1, 2, 3, if that makes sense. And then it'll go to 2 singles. And some of them will look a little awkward. Like I know when I plan a design like this that there are photos that are going to go here. So this looks a little plain and unfinished, but that's because the pictures are going to go there, and there's no sense in me covering up every bit of the pattern paper or every bit of the background cardstock since I know the photos are going to go there. So 2 singles there. Then a double. Oops, double in the wrong order. Don't worry about having to figure these out on the video. These are all included on the PDF. And then 2 singles. So sometimes it helps in this process when you're using the collection pack. These are 2 single layouts. They're very different and they won't need to be designed together. But I've been able to repeat a few patterns across the divide so that they'll sit really nicely in an album and still work as 2 coordinating pages, even though they're 2 single pages in design, rather than a double layout like this that goes across the join. I do use double pages like this in my albums, even though I use ring binders. And if the design goes across the center and I want it to and I want that to be obvious, then I just sew the 2 page protectors together so that it keeps the 2 pages in the middle together. And sometimes I repeat elements, like I had all of these larger pieces laid down and then I lined them up so that I could get these 2 pieces relatively equal and even across the 2 pages, but it's still 2 single layouts and they'll end up looking very different. A few more singles at the end. This one is quite plain so that I can have room for a nice big photo. And then one final page, and I tend to choose something that has a more central design for that finishing page. It has a nice, just a nice way to close an album, because central designs as one or the other in a 2-page spread don't work quite as well. They tend to look a little bit off balance, but when it's just that last page on show at the very end of the album, then that works really well. So that's my 16 layouts. And that's not so shabby from one collection pack. That's a lot of layouts. And I don't know about you, but if I went to a crop and had 16 pages by the end of it, I would be ecstatic. I've never made that many pages in a crop. That may have to do with the fact that I talk a little more than I scrap when I scrap with other people. But, moving on. Okay, so I have these, and these are all to this point that I would call starting point layouts. They don't have the photos, and there are plenty of options for where the photos could go. Nothing's been added. There's just this basic framework in the background, and then there's plenty of freedom left to go. So at this point, I grab my photos and I start to make a master plan of what's going to go where. So I'll get my pictures and then I'll spread them out throughout the pages, and sometimes it may help to go ahead and put these in page protectors so that you can just pop the pictures in with each page if you're going to do a lot of planning for what would be one finished book. But if you would prefer to have all random photos and these are all going to be separate layouts, then don't worry, you can just start with one and go right through to the ending, the finished product with that layout, and then go to the next one. But there's definitely plenty of room for each of these to be unique pages, and we can start by adding the pictures and all those things that we're used to at this point. At this stage, I have all my photos printed out, and I've started to go through and put them in an order and see what will work where and all sorts of things like that. And I would normally do this with page protectors in the album, probably if I had the space. But to show you here, without all that extra bulk, I'm just showing you in a stack. So this works too. And I'm going to put all these pages in mostly chronological order. So this is all pictures from one trip. And this starts with a silly little picture of us on the train on the way to the airport. And it will go through the whole trip in order. And I wanted to address what happens when you get to a point in your photos where they don't quite work with the pictures. So for example, I've just got that one to start off with, which is fine because I'll have a big title and some journaling to explain. And then there's a mix of doubles and singles. So I've been able to grab photos that go together to kind of to stretch over a double page. And then I have single pagers that have single photos that will need more space for writing if there's a lot more to be told about what's in that picture, or double photos that are going to take up more room on the page, and then I'll have space for title, writing, and embellishment. So there's a relatively good balance that just comes by knowing how many pictures you like to include on a page, whether you like to work in doubles and singles and things like that. So you can kind of get an idea and you go through your pictures and allocate them to the layouts where you think they will best work. And keep in mind that nothing here is set in stone. So what if I decided that this particular layout worked better with a set of photos that were at the end of the trip? I can just move it because everything matches, so it doesn't matter what order things go in. I just try to follow whatever stack I've made because it gives me one less thing to worry about, and then if I need to make changes because something doesn't work, then I'll do that. But in general, I try and think, okay, so is there anything else that goes with this photo? Do I want to have lots of room for writing with that picture? Do I want to balance it with lots of embellishment? So for example, these two are both going to be single photo layouts, but there's more writing to go along with this photo because this photo doesn't make sense on its own. It needs the story of why this photo was important to me. So I've given that photo to a page that has plenty of room and not a lot of other things going on, so that I'll be able to include lots of writing on this page and not just cover up everything else that I've already put on there. Whereas this one will have some writing, but not nearly as much as that one. So this one gets the busier page, so I can let more of this mixture of pattern papers show through. Now, there's another conundrum. What happens when you get to a stage where you've got photos that you want to keep together? So I have these 5 shots that really should be on a double page spread, and I've allocated everything I've made and I don't have any doubles left. Well, that's why I do this stage now and allocate the photos to the different pages that I've set up, because at this point I can still add another double page layout, and that's exactly what I'll do. I'll take these photos and I'll take 2 cardstock sheets, and there's not a lot of this pattern paper left, but there is enough to make it work over a double page spread with 5 photos. So and if I had all of these photos and I didn't have quite enough, one of my other techniques to make that work is to go back and print one of these photos in a much larger size. So if I print it at, say, 8.5 by 11, then I have a massive amount of the real estate of the page taken up. So I wouldn't need as much pattern paper and things like that. But that's why I allocate it all at this point, because it's a happy medium between getting the pages prepped but not having the photos versus do I make every single page from start to finish with just the photo as the start? Do I grab this photo and make this whole layout before I make the rest of the album. So this is a method that works for me, especially if I want to use the whole collection pack or if I want to make a whole album that coordinates from start to finish. Either way. So now I'm going to go ahead and get started once I have, because I have all the photos allocated to the layouts. And I'm going to take you through a few different things that I do with these pages to help them come to life. They won't look plain like this or just very simple, even though it's hard to say this is plain because the patterns are very bold, but you know what I mean. There's just one sheet of cardstock and 2 pattern papers. There's not much else going on. So I'm going to take you through my process for then going layout by layout to make this page come to life and fit my style. One of the first things that can determine your style from start to finish is to decide whether you like photo mats or whether you prefer photos to be stuck straight to the pattern paper. You can do a mix, and in this album I will have a mix of some photos matted and some not, but this is my little guideline, is if the patterns are really, really bold and bright and it makes it hard to see your photo, then I add a simple mat around the edge. So to get this album started, I'm going to cut a mat to go with that 4x6 picture, just from black cardstock. So I'm still using my stack of neutrals. I haven't had to go find any other magic color matches to make it all work. And then I have my cutout elements, my little border strips, and of course I'm going to be adding titles and things like that. So I like to find different elements that I can keep consistent throughout, so I'll be cutting out these frames and the little cameras to add as my embellishments. And that also helps if you need to stretch a collection further to save on the investment, because you can take one piece of pattern paper and get plenty of embellishments from it versus a pack of pre-made embellishments, which I love as well, but you might get 6 or 8 for $4, and that's pretty hefty versus I can get 25 frames from one sheet of pattern paper. So this tends to be the option that I go with. So I'm going to spend some time cutting out cameras and frames, and then I can create little spots of embellishment with those layers of paper, and that will be something that's easy to repeat throughout the whole album. So that I can do things like this, and when I have a smaller embellishment that I'm going to layer over a larger one, I often use pop dots or foam squares to give that a bit of the dimension between the two, so that it has that shadow behind and just gives a little bit more interest. Very, very simple, and once you have a pack of pop dots, then you're ready to go. These barcode strips and any other little strips of pattern paper you have left come in handy for adding another little element. So I have a vertical piece here. I'd love for this to have a horizontal element to balance that. So I just place the whole sheet down and then I trim to what will be a good match. Ink the edges to match everything else on the page and run that underneath. And when I'm layering different pattern papers, I never put my adhesive right to the edge. I put it a little bit in so that I can add those layers underneath without having to pull everything up off the page. And now I can start to look for how my title is going to work and finish off with some writing. And then I have a few more steps that I'll come back one last pass through the album to add the absolute finishing touches. So with the thickers that I have in the collection kit, I'm going to use those for all my main titles throughout. And then I've also chosen a smaller alphabet in black that I can use for kind of subtitles or just to give me a bit more variety and things where maybe the white on a white page wouldn't work. I'll have the black alphabet instead. And I've added the writing in. Now, there's still quite a lot of emptiness going on here. I haven't put anything else in this box. I haven't put anything up in this top area of the page. And what I'll probably end up doing is I can imagine that there'll be some more embellishment in this corner, and I can imagine that I'll come back to this box and add some things like stamping and maybe a punch shape or some gems or something like that to finish it off. But what I do is I go through page by page and work to this kind of level where if I did put this in my album, all the things that are completely necessary are there. I've got my pretty paper, I've got my photos, I've got my writing, and a little bit of embellishment, but not perhaps to the extreme that I would normally have on my pages. And this process lets me get the most out of the pack because I can get everything done to a point where it could work, and then I just go back and add things to make it better and make it more what I would like artistically. Turning to the next layout in my album, it's a double page layout, and I've added the photos that I want to include. So I have 3 4x6 and 1 Instax print, and then wanted to look at things that would make the layout complete, but also give a bit of motion. And one thing that can be really useful is to take one shape and repeat it in as many ways as possible. So I started with a pattern paper that had some circular elements, and I used a variety of sizes of circle punch to create 3 different sizes of circle accents. And that way I could take those pattern paper elements and just repeat them in a group that would give a visual line that goes diagonal across the full 12 by 24 canvas, so that this feels cohesive as a double page, so that you read it from one side to the next. But just using paper embellishments can often look a little bit unfinished if your pages normally include more embellishment than that. So I then went to look for other things with that same shape. So I'm basically going into my stash to look at how can I repeat one shape. So since I've used a circle punch here, I started with some buttons. So I can keep adding buttons along this line and pretend that this line goes all the way through. So then I need to fill this gap near the top of the page here, and that creates a different dimension so that there's another element other than just paper included. And it's still working on this diagonal line from one point to the next. And buttons are a really simple embellishment. There's something that you might already have on hand, so it's just a case of finding the right color for what you've chosen on your layout. Then if I want to add another step to this, I'll start to look for something else that's circular but smaller. And my next go-to embellishment in things like this is gems. So I happen to have this set that has both pink and turquoise, so that will match this collection. So I'm just going to dot those about in this same the same diagonal clusters, so that this line forms, and it's just a loose line of embellishments that your eye can follow from one side to the other. And that's pretty much it. And then if I wanted to add even more, I'd start to look for other things that are circular, and where I've started with larger circles, I'm working down to smaller pieces. So something smaller than this, I might add just little individual stitches like a French knot, so just punch one hole and bring the thread through, tie a knot, and bring the thread back again. Or paint splatters along this line, just take the tube out of the paint and lightly tap it to create some motion with the unpredictability of the paint coming off the tube. And this kind of page design also gives me some purposeful big empty space. And I like to, when I'm making a full album, I like to leave a few places like this, because if I leave this empty, there's no problem with that. But what if I finish the whole album and then I realize, oh, but I didn't write this down, and I didn't write that down, and I didn't write the other down. If I have a few places like this that are big and empty, I can come back in and write in more words when I don't I have a full layout to go with that. There are just more things that I want to include. So this is the sort of space where I might include things like where we stayed in this town, or the dates, addresses, locations, all sorts of things that I might include in a list. Maybe I talk in this little bit of journaling about the different shops that we found and how they were, there was quite a variety. Maybe I would list out the shops from my journal that I thought were particularly noteworthy, something like that. But if I decide I don't need to write anymore, this works fine on its own. No one's going to open my album and be like, oh my goodness, you've wasted this giant corner over here. But because it's there, it means I have that potential to go back and add more writing if when I'm starting to get finished, I realize actually it won't be finished until that's included. So circular embellishments, or just looking for one shape and then finding all different things that you could use with that shape. I could also add brads into this mix, other circular elements, but circle punches, punching from the pattern paper, and then adding buttons and gems is an easy way to embellish, and it can go with pretty much any theme because you'll be able to choose patterns that already match what you're working with. Moving on to the next one, this is a single page again, and in this case there's a lot of vertical going on, and I've added a little bit of paint across the diagonal to try and increase that movement so everything doesn't look so straight up and down. But there's another element that I quite like when everything looks a little bit too boxy. So there's, a strip and another strip and a photo and a box. It's all a bit too even for me, and my border punches really come into their own in cases like this. So throughout an album, I might pick one border punch that can repeat here and there, and it doesn't need to be on every single page. And the notebook border punch is really versatile for things like this because it's just a different paper edge. It doesn't have any extra meaning or anything. Some of them that have flowers or hearts, for example, wouldn't match everything, and some of them are very specific with words or images that would only work for a few different topics. But something like a notebook punch will go with pretty much anything. And so if I have a few extra small strips in my little pile of leftover papers, last bit. There we go. And then I will punch a few pieces like that, and I might actually be able to get, no, I don't think so, so that I have a few little border pieces like this. And when I'm adding things to my layouts, I'm never adding the adhesive right at the edge, so that I always have this flexibility of coming back and adding other elements in. So I'm just going to tuck this behind the photo, and because everything else was so straight and vertical, I want to put this on a bit of an angle, not hugely, but just a little bit, so that I'm creating a little bit more movement. And then I'm going to repeat that same idea in this corner with this pattern paper that was down here, so that I'm creating this kind of triangle of pink, but also the two repeated pieces of paper on a diagonal line can really help bring your eye across the page. So I'm going to place this one up here and also on an angle, and then I'm going to come in and add my repeating embellishment here, the camera, and I've just punched a scallop circle from one of the pieces of paper in the leftover pile, so that I can have that little bit of an extra layer behind the camera. And then the camera on top with foam squares to give it that bit of dimension. And then I can add to that, I can add the same sort of things that I added before. So I could add the gems in these little spots here, for example, or I could add buttons, brads, anything else that that I've picked out to use elsewhere in the album. But just like that, different things that repeat, I can then use that same border punch design, whichever punch I've chosen, with several different little strips of paper that are left in the scrap pile once all the pages are mostly put together. And then that can just repeat. And even if it's only on maybe every one page in 6, it will give that continuity that when you're flipping through the album, it will feel very natural to the eye that pattern is repeating, rather than trying to push everything I own into one album. And if it also means that if you're going to create this on the road, if you're going to a crop or you need to take everything with you, you're only packing one border punch rather than having to look at everything you might own and try and figure out which one you'll need. Or if you're just getting started and you only have one border punch, just embrace it and use that as a positive thing rather than feeling frustrated that you don't have 12 million designs. One will serve you just as well and you'll be absolutely fine. Of course, if you're somebody who does have lots more tools and you might have something like an electronic die cutter or a cutting device, then those things aren't any use unless we use them. So for this particular page, I've cut a I cut a word with the silhouette so that I can add that to my design and have it in a pattern paper that I know is going to coordinate with the collection because it's from that same pack. So this is the sheet that I had cut to 8.5 by 11 and kept at that size. And if you don't have a full sheet of pattern paper left over, do keep in mind that you don't necessarily have to cut a full sheet of paper. Quite often I'll just cut a partial sheet, and the cutting mats on things like this will show you the measurements. And so this shows you by inches on the mat, and then when you're working in Silhouette Studio, you have this same thing on the screen. So if I only have 5 by 7 to work with in paper, I just want to make sure that my design will fit in that 5 by 7. And the only other thing to keep in mind is to make sure that if you have a small pattern paper or a small piece of paper that's stuck, that make sure you get all those edges really, really stuck down to the mat, because it's easier for this small piece of paper to come loose and then not cut correctly, rather than the large paper that has that big expanse to be stuck to the background. So with that added, or that cut, I can then add that to the page, and I can pop in my repeated embellishment, the camera, and have something that I can use just once on one page, or I can find a range of designs that will match most of my album and I can cut them repeatedly. But if you have such a gadget in your collection, it's definitely a great time to make use of it. And if you were going to take this on the road, you could figure out all the different things you want to cut them on one 8.5 by 11 or one 12 by 12, and just leave it stuck to the sheet. And then when you go to the crop, so you could just take the whole sheet with you and you can peel them off as you go, and then you don't have to worry about those fine, tiny cuts getting damaged or lost in your crop bag. And I find that's the most useful thing, is to just keep it on the sheet until you're ready to stick it to the layout. One more single page here to look at different ways that we can add more to these pages to dress them up once they've already been done with that same collection pack. And that's to start using some stamps to repeat designs throughout the album. Now in this case, I've grabbed the stamp set that goes along with this collection pack, but there's no reason why I couldn't choose any other favorite stamp set. It doesn't have to be the one that necessarily goes with this collection. So finding one stamp set that can be used throughout the album can be really versatile, since stamps give you that option of being able to add lots and lots of the same embellishment here, there, and everywhere throughout the album without having to purchase all those elements separately. Once you've got the stamp ready, then you can use it as much as you like. So this is one that I can then add this same repeated stamp throughout the book in different places. And then to get the most out of the pack, I'll try and do that with several different designs that are here. Every page, I'd look to be able to repeat things like stamps, punch designs, die cuts, and see how far I can stretch the different papers that I have. Now, to have a look at how this works in the finished format, go ahead and have a look at that PDF, which I'll put the address here again now, and that includes a look at the starting points where each layout began, so you have a basic sketch for where the papers end up in the album, and also the cutting guide for how to cut the different sheets of pattern paper to give you an idea of how far you can stretch one collection pack. But then it will also show you the finished pages, every single page right down to all the finished details, so that you can see how these different elements repeat through a process. And then you can take one collection pack and your photos and decide to do as many pages as you like. I'd love for you to drop me a line and share your work with whatever collection pack gives you a great project in the end. I hope this encourages you to not be afraid to pick up the scissors and cut up that collection pack of yours. And I hope to see you soon at Shimelle.com. Thanks for watching and enjoy True Scrap.